stage and on stage, and was sometimes even too crazy for him. Also briefly talks about how this is no longer called Blizzard of Oz. It's just kind of his solo thing. And I know that's kind of a strange issue, but he actually addresses it a little bit in this article. And so I'm going to read this to you, and it says, "Inside the Asylum. With Bark at the Moon securing his position as the high priest of macabre metal, Ozzy Osbourne remains one of the most controversial and popular figures in rock history. Despite more than 15 years reigning the rock domain, to many people, Ozzy remains the ultimate enigma. A man capable of being a bat-biting geek." That's kind of a funny... Do you remember that word being used that way? I don't know. Anyway, just was a strange word to use there. Bat-biting geek, or a charming gentleman with equal aplomb. Here now is an inside look at Ozzy Osbourne, the man, the myth, the loon. Okay, Hit Parader. Ozzy, looking back over your career, is there anything that you'd have changed? Ozzy, really not a darn thing. There have been good times and there have been some bad, but they've all helped make me who I am, and that's something I have no desire to change. Now, one thing to put this in context is pretty fascinating. When this article is being published, Ozzy is 35. And so he's been around for a little while now, but still, you know, you think of those things in those terms, and that's still so, I mean, to me right now, thinking of 35, that's so young. But anyway, that just kind of puts this in context that he is well into his career, but compared to, you know, he just kept going and going. He was actually still fairly young. And that's what's, to me, that's also kind of interesting when you look at these interviews, to think of the fact that he's really not that far removed from Black Sabbath. This is 1984, so you're talking about just a few years earlier was when he left Black Sabbath. I'm the luckiest man alive to be able to do what I do and get away with it. I've become famous by acting in ways that other people may have been arrested for. I love that line. Hit Parader. But it's true that much of what you do is an act. You're not the crazy man that everybody imagines all the time, are you? Ozzy, I couldn't be. I'd go absolutely crazy. I know that during the last tour, I would hang out with Motley Crue in the hotel bars. Those guys are amazing. They're crazy rock and rollers 24 hours a day. They're the same off stage and on. And that actually answers the question I was talking about a minute ago, where, and if you saw The Dirt, I don't know, man. They made Ozzy look way crazier than Motley Crue, but at least from Ozzy's perspective here, Motley Crue is just this wild group of people. And he actually goes on and talks more about that in a minute. I watched them for a while throwing peanuts at people, and I said to my wife, Sharon, I guess I'm getting old. I can't be Ozzy all the time anymore. It's great when people see me sitting in a restaurant and they stare at me like I'm going to do something crazy at any moment. A lot of the time, I don't disappoint them. Again, it's really important to think of these things in context, because the guys in Motley Crue would have been so much younger than him. Ozzy is now 35 years old, and you know what that was like. You know, you start getting into that point, and you're married, and you've got a couple of kids, and even though you have a little bit of that energy left in you, the stuff that you did in your early 20s, there's part of you that goes, I don't know if I really want to participate in that quite the way I used to. Okay. What was the craziest thing that happened on the last tour? I know there weren't any animals killed or bats bitten, but I'm sure there was a fair share of lunacy anyhow. Ozzy, I guess the strangest thing I did was in one place where a group of religious freaks were protesting my appearance. They were saying all the standard crap about me worshiping the devil, and they had organized a picket line outside the arena. I thought to myself that they really didn't know what they were protesting. And on top of that, they probably didn't even know who I was. To prove that point, I made up a sign with a smiling face that said, "Have a nice day." I joined the end of their picket line and they didn't even notice me. That shows you how crazy those people are. Now, I don't know if this happened for sure or not. I didn't look it up to see if there was any other evidence of this happening. But that is a fascinating idea. You know, and how many of you remember that stuff? You'd go to these concerts and you'd have these people out there with the, you know, big cross and a megaphone telling everybody not to go in because it was the devil's music. And anyway, just looking back now, it all seems so silly. But at the time, people were really, really serious about it. So anyway, And it was, and of course, bands like Ozzy and Iron Maiden and Motley Crue, and there were so many groups. Matter of fact, I think I even saw that out in front of a Journey concert. It was just everywhere. These people protesting this rock music, and so whatever. It was just kind of fascinating stuff. Hit Prater, why does it bother you so much that people have singled you out as the symbol of rock's demonic image? Ozzy, basically because it's totally untrue. No matter what I say or do, people say that I'm Satan himself. Look at the Bark at the Moon cover. The cover has nothing at all to do with the devil, but just because I'm dressed up like a werewolf, people say it has to do with Satan. What rubbish. They even say that a song like Rock and Roll Rebel shows I'm in league with the devil. If they took the time to listen to the lyrics, they'd know they're completely wrong. I say, they think I worship the devil, they only see through his eyes. To me, that says it all. They only see and hear what they want. And by the way, I got that album out. I actually remember seeing this for the first time. And it was, I don't know, it creeped me out a little bit. But I mean, again, looking back at this stuff, this is all just, it's all just entertainment. And it's all showmanship. And it's all just imagery to make things more interesting. And this kind of stuff spoke to, people our age that were into this kind of music, and it kind of represented that stuff. And it's just, there's something really important about that last line, because it just applies to so many things. They only see and hear what they want. And that's a principle that just applies so far beyond any of this stuff right here. But I think that was really, really true with so many of these people that were protesting. You see you find whatever you're looking for. If you're looking for this kind of stuff in the music, you're going to find it. But isn't outrage what really has made you famous? Do you think if it wasn't for your image, you'd be as successful as you've been? Ozzy, I don't know. I think everyone has something in them and would like to be like me to a certain extent. We all have a little crazy in us. I just let that come out. People of all ages seem to have a macabre fascination with me. It's like an auto accident. You might not like what you see, but you feel an incredible urge to go over and look. And there's a lot of truth to this too, because when you look back at the early Black Sabbath days, he wasn't this. It was this really, really got enhanced the more and more he got into his, solo career. Just this really over the top craziness. And but perhaps there really was something to that when he got on that solo career that did, those legends, those things going from town to town, hearing all the stuff, he bites the head off the dove and the bat, and then it just grows and grows and grows. You know what I'm talking about. And somehow that just the legend becomes part of it. And of course, then he becomes more and more famous, not just for what he actually did, but for the legend that follows him. Hit Prater, what causes that fascination? Ozzy, people want to be scared or see something out of the ordinary. That's why horror movies are successful. I know that at my shows, people come to see the most bizarre things even I'd never think of doing. And by the way, again, this is such an important point, because when you think about why Black Sabbath was called Black Sabbath, some of those early discussions, I think it was Tony Iommi that talked about this, that said they came to this realization that people pay money to go be scared in movies. And so they thought, well, we could actually be just the music version of that same thing, because people enjoy it. People like to be scared. They like to feel those emotions. And so Black Sabbath and then Ozzy found a way just to tap into these things that people like to experience this stuff. And so much of just heavy metal in general did that. It created these emotions because people like to feel things. And so the music actually helped you feel something. And so anyway, and it helped. And like he says here, then people started coming to his shows looking for things, like he said, that he wouldn't even do. We played in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania during this tour, and there was this mature couple in the front row. They had to be in their early 30s, and they kept jumping up every time we played a fast song. It was like they were waiting for me to go over and saw the guitarist's legs off or something. Every time I didn't do that, they'd sit down. It was like the music and the show were irrelevant. They wanted to see something totally insane. Okay, and then here's this quote, Motley Crue has been great. They're totally insane. People say I'm the crazy man of rock. They have to see those guys in action, which is kind of funny. Now, I think there's kind of a typo here because Ozzy now answers a question, but we don't know what the question was. It's actually missing, but we're just going to keep reading here. I was, but it got to be too expensive. I have no idea what they were talking about here. The people who are involved with putting on a stage show, the lighting people, the costume designers, charge a fortune for what they do. They wanted $25,000 to design a werewolf concert costume for me. I wouldn't pay that for anything. I can't see paying ridiculous sums of money for something you're going to wear a few times and then throw away. Believe me, I'll never, ever compromise when it comes to spending on my stage set. Hit Prater. Obviously, a great deal of careful thought and planning goes into your stage show. Who comes up with the ideas? Ozzy. Actually, my wife, Sharon, comes up with the ideas. She came up with the idea for the werewolf on Bark at the Moon, and she had the idea for most of the stage set. She's great at coming up with things like that. Oh, and by the way, part of the answer to the question that I asked earlier about what do these two albums have in common is a direct result of Sharon. Something to think about if you don't know the answer here. The band on this tour is a little different than your last touring group because Carmine Appice is on drums. It seems that you're always changing personnel. Does that make things hard on you? Ozzy, not at all. I'm making up for lost time. I played with the same old boring guys for 10 years in Black Sabbath. Now I want to play with as many different people as possible. Now listen to what he says here, because this gets back to that whole Blizzard of Oz thing. Everybody thinks that the band is called Blizzard of Oz. That's not true. We're simply billed as Ozzy Osbourne, so whoever I can feel like playing with fits into what we're doing. Now, the original band and what Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake and Randy Rhoads signed up for was to be in a band called Blizzard of Oz. When they put the album out, it says Blizzard of Oz, but they realized from a marketing standpoint that they'd be a lot better off if they just really emphasized Ozzy's name on the cover. A lot of you already know this. But then what happened for so many of us that just didn't know, we didn't have all the information that we have today about this stuff. You just assume that the album is called Blizzard of Oz and it's by the solo artist Ozzy Osbourne. And a couple of the guys did not really like the fact that this was then immediately seen as Ozzy's solo career and not a band called Blizzard of Oz, because they thought they were signing up to be in a band called Blizzard of Oz. Well, interestingly, in this article now, Ozzy has kind of embraced that ultimately and said, look, the band, it's not called Blizzard of Oz. What's happening now is I'm not tying myself to any individual people. That's his whole point here. This is no longer a band that has specific people in it. This is me and whoever I feel like playing with. So real change of tune here just a couple of years later on what was happening. So whoever I feel like playing with fits into what we're doing. There's no requirement to keep the same people in the band all the time. If Carmine wants to leave or Don Airy get a better offer, they're free to go. I'll just get somebody else and keep going. Hit Prater. You've gone through so many guitarists since Randy Rhoads' death. Would you mind, for instance, if Jakey Lee took off and formed his own group? Now, of course, that's so many guitarists. Two? I mean, you had Randy Rhoads obviously passed away, and then Brad Gillis from Night Ranger came in and played on Speak of the Devil. Now you have Jakey Lee. But the question, would you mind if Jakey Lee took off and formed his own group? And this is an interesting answer. Not at all. I'd hope that if and when that happens, we part as friends. But I'd say, best of luck, mate, and find somebody new. After going through what I did with Randy, I realized that nobody is indispensable. Hit Prater. It seems that Jake has been drawing a lot of attention on this tour. And of course, he was drawing a ton of attention because, for all of us that were Ozzy fans, this was kind of, we were looking forward to finding out who's this new guitarist and what's he going to be like. Because we all knew about Randy passing away, obviously, and then bringing Brad Gillis in, doing the Speak of the Devil album, and then, okay, new album's coming out. Who's this guy? Jakey Lee. And when you look at his band, it's just kind of interesting to note now, that he's got this different band. I mean, there's Jakey Lee, Bob Daisley, Ozzy, of course, Tommy Aldridge, and Don Airey. So anyway, this is his current band, and this kind of emphasizes the point that he's okay with just this revolving door of people in the group. And so, like I said, Jake was somebody that we had, all of us, you remember this, we're looking forward to this and listening to him and hearing what it was like. And we were, I don't know about you, I loved it. You hear the song Bark at the Moon, you're like, this guy's killer. This guy's amazing guitar player. And now kind of, in his own way is legend status for taking that spot in Ozzy's band back then. So then it goes on and says, does it bother you when somebody else in the band begins to emerge as a star? Ozzy, I really love it. It takes a great deal of pressure off me. I'd love to see Jake's picture on the cover of Hit Parader soon. My ego is secure enough to deal with the attention that anybody else gets. Something like that inspires me to work harder on stage. I've always surrounded myself with very good people, and many of them have gone on to form very successful bands of their own. Look at Rudy Sarzo and Quiet Riot, and Brad Gillis and Night Ranger. They helped me when they were in my band, but the experience obviously was beneficial for them as well. And that is such an interesting and important thing to remember, because it did give Night Ranger a little bump, for sure. I mean, I remember when, after Brad Gillis had played, I don't know that I had heard the name, did we? Night Ranger, prior to Brad Gillis being, and maybe I had, but the point was that actually helped a little bit with the Night Ranger thing, because there were so many of us that loved Ozzy. Brad Gillis is Ozzy's guitarist temporarily. Brad Gillis plays with Night Ranger. Who is this Night Ranger? And then we become interested. I loved Night Ranger. I was a huge fan of those guys. Well, the first album, I wasn't a huge fan of the albums after that. Some of them were okay, but that first album was killer. And I was partly interested in it because of Brad Gillis. You make those connections. And similar thing with Rudy Sarzo. That probably, his connection there with some of this stuff probably in some ways helped Quiet Riot a little bit. And that's also kind of an important thing to remember, even with Black Sabbath, because you have to think that just Ozzy's, his amazing fame that he was able to gain as a, quote, solo artist, in some ways continued to help Black Sabbath in their new incarnations, help them stay on the map. Because everybody, following Ozzy then, you just always kind of had Black Sabbath at least in the back of your mind just for that reason. And so these things all do kind of impact each other. You have to remember it's a really important point here that he makes that thing. Obviously, it was beneficial for them as well. There's no question about it. That having that association, being in that band, playing with Ozzy, is going to help you in your other career. Okay, Hit Parader, how do you view the current stage of hard rock? You mentioned Quiet Riot. And on this tour, you've been playing on the same bill as Motley Crue. How do you feel about these bands? Ozzy, Motley Crue have been great. They're totally insane. People say, I'm the crazy man of rock. They ought to see those guys in action. And that gets back to the early thing that I said a little bit at the beginning of this video. When he talks here about Motley Crue, is like, these guys are way worse than me. Let's see here. They ought to see these guys in action. Actually, I love a lot of newer groups. I think Def Leppard are wonderful. I speak to Joe Elliott quite often, and I just love their attitude and their talent. I guess I'm a little jealous too, he laughs. There are some bands around who really aren't that good, but that's to be expected. Hard rock has made a big resurgence recently, so a lot of people have jumped on the bandwagon hoping to cash in on the trend. And isn't that the truth? It seems like somewhere right around this time, there was just this never-ending parade of bands that would go through the rest of the 80s. The problem really from my perspective, is it just kind of became ching, 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 cookie cutters. Like just the same thing over and over and over. I guess that wasn't a cookie cutter sound. That was more of a stamp. That was another way to put it. Like just the same thing, repeat over and over and over, the same type of music, the same band, the same formula. You had anyway, just kind of got rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. We had the same thing, and so much of it was you had so much success in the early 80s with this hard rock and heavy metal that the record companies are looking at this going, this is where the money is. And then they got to keep pumping out different variations of it until we finally got sick of it. I know that you really don't consider the music you play heavy metal. What do you call it? Ozzy. It's Ozzy's music. I have nothing against heavy metal. It's just that a song like So Tired has nothing at all to do with that kind of thing. To be called a heavy metal musician is a bit limiting. I want to be able to do a ballad if I want and not feel that I'm selling out. Certain bands are trapped by their metal image. They can't change, even if they want to. That's the thing that scares me. I love heavy metal. It's just the name that I feel is a bit limiting when it comes to my music. And of course, So Tired is a song that was on the album Bark at the Moon that we were just talking about. And it was this very, it was a little bit more of it was just a very slow song. It had that orchestration in it, and it was just a lot more mellow. And he had done those a couple of these things on his solo albums or on the Ozzy stuff, the albums that he'd put out since Black Sabbath. and so there really is something to that idea of not limiting yourself. Ozzy, though, did have the advantage of, at this point in his life, just kind of being a legend. And so, people were going to give him a little bit of leeway, whatever he decided to do at this point, where a lot of other bands, that were new and we just didn't have that same kind of, their audience wasn't going to be quite as forgiving with them. We're getting close to the end of this article, and then I'm going to show you what the connections are, because it actually is answered down in this picture below. You've been playing your kind of music for 16 years. Do you ever feel that you're getting too old for this kind of lifestyle? Again, remember, 35 years old. Never. Rock and roll is what keeps me young. It's what keeps me going. Without it, I'd get old very fast. I love what I'm doing, and I plan on doing it for a long time to come. Right now, I'm more popular than ever, and I'm enjoying it more than ever. And I got to tell you something. I think we've talked about this on this channel before, but they don't talk about it a lot, but that must have driven Geezer and especially Tony Iommi just crazy watching this. They kick him out of the band, and then he goes off and he just gets bigger and bigger and bigger than ever. It's such an amazing thing. And to have been part of Black Sabbath, eventually Geezer goes off and joins him. Anyway, that just had to bug them a little bit. And I sometimes think that might have actually played into some of the rifts during the Dio era. I know they had their own problems. Those were some personalities that were going to struggle a little bit. But you just imagine, you're Tony Iommi, because Black Sabbath is kind of his band. You're Tony, and I mean, I guess it's kind of Geezer's too, but Tony's it's always been his group, because eventually Geezer left and sold the rights to Tony, and Bill Ward was kind of in and out for a long time, but Tony's, always been that consistent character. But there they are, they bring Dio on board. They do Heaven and Hell, which is a great record. And they do Mob Rules, which is a great record. But while they're doing that, Ozzy is off doing this stuff. And even though Black Sabbath's doing okay, they're not doing this. Ozzy's out turning himself into this legend. And so then when they do the live albums, and actually you read articles back then with Dio, and you could tell Dio didn't like it either. He would kind of make these biting comments about Ozzy, because you could tell he was even feeling a little bit of it. Like the echoes of Ozzy are still in Black Sabbath. They can feel his presence almost. And then there's this insecurity that comes with it. Like, why is he doing so well? We're over here making some of the best music Black Sabbath's ever made. We kick Ozzy out because he's a drunk and he's useless, and he goes off and then he starts doing better than us. And then he puts out Speak of the Devil, a live album, right around the same time Black Sabbath's putting out Live Evil. Both albums are Black Sabbath material. And I got to tell you, as a kid, I remember that time. I remember when Speak of the Devil came out. I barely remember when Live Evil came out, because everybody was talking about Speak of the Devil because it was Ozzy. And again, and then, that was the time that Dio and Sabbath split. It was during the Live Evil time period, when they were doing the mixing. So again, like I said, you just have to believe that there was this undercurrent. There was something in there, that the ever-present Ozzy was kind of in their minds almost, and it didn't help. It didn't help Black Sabbath stay together. Okay, so let's keep going here. Do you ever feel like getting too old for it? Never. Rock and roll. I'm more popular than ever. I'm enjoying my life more than ever. My life has stabilized to the point where I can concentrate on my career without having a lot of outside problems hanging over my head. It's a great feeling. It makes me want to run out of here and just bark at the moon. Staying on brand, obviously. All right, so let's jump down to this picture, and then this will kind of answer the question what these two albums have to do with each other. Now, here's a picture of and it says here at the bottom of the picture, notice that. It says the original Blizzard of Oz. From left, Bob Daisley, Randy Rhoads, Ozzy Osbourne, Lee Kerslake. Okay, now, what happened here is, they recorded those two albums, and then Sharon apparently is ultimately responsible for Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake getting kicked out of the band. Okay, now, what do these two albums have to do with each other? Well, Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake, again, leave Blizzard of Oz, leave Ozzy's band, and then they go off and they join Mick Box, who is putting Uriah Heep back together. And if you look at the back of this album, Uriah Heep's Abominog, you'll see right there, Lee Kerslake, Bob Daisley. And then, of course, there's Mick Box. And then they picked up this new singer named Peter Golby. So anyway, what those two have in common was that this album had Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake. And then when they were kicked out really after the next album was recorded, then they went off and joined Uriah Heep and then became a part of Abominog. And anyway, that's what those two things have in common. Welcome to the world of Audio Mover. I'm Robert John Hadfield. Now, before we get to the next episode, I wanted to tell you a little bit about it because this one is pretty special, and we're going to be playing this several times throughout the day. This is the video we produced last year in the days following Ozzy Osbourne's passing. Not long after we published it, Jack Osbourne shared it on his social media, and the response was incredible. That one moment introduced tens of thousands of people to Audio Mover, and for many of you watching today, this is actually the very first video that brought you to the channel. Now, if that's you, thank you for sticking around, and if you're just discovering us today, welcome. Audio Mover is all about the stories behind classic rock, the albums, the artists, the magazines, and the history that made this music so memorable. We now have hundreds of videos covering Ozzy, Black Sabbath, and so many of the other bands and musicians we all grew up with. As always, I'd love to hear from you. So leave a comment, let us know where you're watching from and what Ozzy has meant to you over the years. All right, so here's the video that so many people first discovered us through. Like many of you, I've had Ozzy and Black Sabbath on my mind a lot since that final show. And the day before Ozzy Osbourne passed away, I recorded a video about him asking a question I'd been thinking about for a long time. What is it about this man, once nothing more than a poor kid from the heartless industrial streets of Birmingham, that made him one of the most recognizable people in the world? Well, we edited the video Tuesday morning, scheduled it to go live just after noon, and then moved on to other projects. But as the video went live, we noticed suddenly thousands of views. I was kind of shocked until I saw one of the comments and found out for the first time, Ozzy is gone. And over the next few hours, people from all over the world were commenting on that video, sharing their thoughts on the answer to my question. Some people wrote paragraphs filled with emotion, memories, and deep analysis. Some just wrote a few words. People talked about his voice, his music, his personality, his vulnerability, his guitarists, Sharon, the reality show, and many more things. Well, that afternoon, as I scrolled through the growing list of comments and the outpouring of love and sadness, I couldn't help but think of the first words the world heard from Ozzy. The very first words on the very first Black Sabbath song. What is this that stands before me? At the time, it was part of the drama, the mystique, the horror movie vibe. But looking back, it feels like a premonition, like some blurry glimpse of what was coming, years and decades in the future, something massive, something mythic. And not just for him, but an eruption that would spread across nations and across time. Now, Ozzy couldn't have possibly understood what was really standing before him when he sang those words. Premonition or not, those words, sung by the most unlikely of voices at the time, opened a door that would never close. Ozzy didn't have a traditional rock voice. It was kind of strange, eerie, almost otherworldly, and perfect in its imperfection. It brought something unusually authentic to an unexpected world. They took the blues and turned it into thunder, capturing fear, war, addiction, and dread without flinching. And millions across the world got it. And in an instant, his voice and that music took him to the heights of worldwide fame and success. And in less than a decade, he had gone from being a kid who didn't own a decent pair of shoes to one of the most popular rock stars in the world, to a washed-up drunk kicked out of his own band. Same old story. Most people don't get a second act. Ozzy got a second empire. When Sabbath let him go, he could have faded away. But then came Blizzard of Oz, Randy Rhoads. Crazy Train, Over the Mountain, Diary of a Madman, music that not only revived his career, it kicked it up a notch. And with budding guitar gods that he introduced to the world by his side, he became a solo icon with a whole new generation of fans. Now, for me, that's when I heard of him. Kids in school writing his name on their notebooks, chalkboards, their hands and arms, wearing shirts and jackets emblazoned with his image and name. Ozzy was the voice for the weird kid in the back of the room. The teenager who didn't fit in, for the adult who felt invisible, for the ones who were hurting, confused, angry, or just different. He was never polished, never perfect, and maybe that's part of what made people hold on to him. And the music. Ozzy is one of the few people on earth who created a song that nearly everyone has heard. After watching a few of our videos last week, my mother called me and said, "I don't think I've ever heard any of Ozzy's music." So I sent her a link to Crazy Train, and of course she answered, "Oh yeah, I've heard that." Crazy Train isn't just a metal anthem, it's a part of global culture. You hear it at sporting events, in nightclubs, played in cover bands, used in commercials, broadcasts, remixes. It never goes away. And that song is unique in a way that most people never notice. Because it does something truly rare in popular music, something that most people can't or won't try. You see, it switches between major and minor keys several times in the song. It's so subtle and so seamless, you almost don't notice. That subtle shift, positive and negative, light and dark, oddly mirrors the man who brought it to the world. And like him, represents all of us in some small way, the dichotomy we all have inside. And that dichotomy was part of a broader Ozzy mythology that started with bats and doves. Even those animals side by side perfectly represent him. As his career progressed, there were moments when he seemed like a cartoon, too bizarre to possibly be real. But there was also pain, honesty, fragility. He talked openly about addiction, about his personal demons, about fear. And in doing that, he gave others permission to be honest too. One of the most famous and successful men in the world seemed like one of the most common. Ozzy's concerts brought that paradox to life. The music was filled with that alluring dark energy, but the vibe in the arena
It was joy. Pure, manic, electric joy. He would pace the stage like a madman. He'd put his mic on and off the stand, it seemed, 20 times a minute. He'd bounce, shout, clap his hands, throw buckets of water on the crowd. He couldn't sit still, and he didn't want you to either. All night long, he'd yell, "Let me see your hands," clap, scream, go crazy. While ministers were outside his concerts warning people not to go in, inside, there was a revival. A time to let go of your inhibitions and enjoy the unique collective energy that only he could create. And then, something no one could have imagined. He moved seamlessly and inexplicably from scaring parents in the 80s to being invited into their living rooms just over a decade later. The Osbournes turned him into an unlikely TV dad, and people loved him even more for it. The old audience and a whole new audience, and the connection grew. This time, a generational connection. And you begin to realize that connection was broader and deeper than we understood at the moment. Because behind the flaws, the imperfections, the strange behavior, there was love. You see, he didn't wait until the end of his shows to say, "We love you," like most performers. He shouted it in between songs, in the middle of guitar solos, during the loudest riffs, "I love you all." And the thing is, he meant it. It wasn't performative. It wasn't a routine part of the script for the concert. It was his kind of unique hymn of acceptance. In the middle of all that darkness, he was shining something bright. This strange, broken, beautiful man telling a whole arena of outsiders that they mattered, that they belonged. And then that final show. He couldn't pace the stage anymore. He couldn't lift buckets or move from one end of the platform to the other. You could feel his frustration. But even though he couldn't, I think all of us who watched it could see it anyway. Ozzy was a walking contradiction, a madman and somehow entirely sane, drunk and sober, chaotic and still, part of the elite yet perfectly common. He was a millionaire who never stopped talking like a working class kid from Birmingham. A devil on stage with a heart full of love. He terrified parents and became America's most unlikely TV dad. He sang of war, death, and fear, and then kissed Sharon on the forehead and told his fans he loved them. At times, he was lost and damaged, and he didn't hide any of it. And maybe that's why people trusted him. He didn't pretend to be perfect. He just kept showing up, broken, wild, hilarious, emotional. His imperfections weren't flaws, they were features. But his real legacy is the people, the fans, tens of millions of us who felt like misfits, who found meaning in his music and in his story. He not only showed the world you could fall down and get back up again, but he showed them you could fall down again and get back up again, over and over. Just keep moving. And if you do, there's a throne waiting for you. You know, as the days passed after his death, the initial premise of that first video I posted became more obvious than ever. Everyone, young and old, rich and poor, east and west, had heard of him. And that odd name, Ozzy, was suddenly on the lips of hundreds of millions of people across the world. And it occurred to me, his final purpose may have been one that nobody would have ever expected. In our time when the world feels fractured, where everyone lives in their own echo chamber, follows their own tribe, consumes their own customized news feeds, we've lost something. A sense of unity. Something that can only come from collective experience. Those rare, almost sacred moments when the entire world seems to pause and feel something together. They're hard to come by these days. And who could have ever expected that this unusual, unlikely man would give us one of those moments? One that was different and strangely personal. When the news broke that Ozzy Osbourne had passed away, something strange happened. The world paused. People everywhere stopped scrolling. And for just a moment, we were united, not in outrage, not in argument, but in memory. And it didn't matter how you knew him, whether he was the Black Sabbath frontman, the solo artist, the MTV dad, the TikTok meme, or just the guy your older brother used to blast through the walls. We all knew him. And for one fleeting moment, we all kind of got it. And that phrase he probably shouted 10,000 times, "I love you all," takes on new meaning as I personally look back at the insecure kid I was. That whoever you are, you're a child of God with value and purpose. You matter and you belong. He wasn't perfect and we may never know why, but in this moment, he became the focal point of that collective experience, reminding us that for all of our differences, we are not as far apart as we think. We still have memories we share, songs we hum, legends we pass on, and once in a while, we still feel something together. And we can take to heart the most memorable words of his most famous song. Maybe it's not too late to learn how to love and forget how to hate.